My boss called the cops because I went home with a fever. Apparently, you're not allowed to get sick with anything but COVID anymore. I committed the awful crime of getting a normal fever, and my boss just wasn't okay with that. I went home to rest, and the next thing I know, the police were pounding on my door. Turned out my boss had called the cops. The real insane part is that it was my other boss who sent me home in the first place. But I guess that just wasn't good enough. This story is bat nuts crazy, and just shows how awful managers are to their workers. This happened a few weeks ago. I'm a 23-year-old woman and work at a nice daycare. We're still doing some COVID screenings, mainly temperature checks and masking. I went into work one morning feeling fine and great, but as I went on, I started feeling really tired and sick. My assistant general manager, who's kind of like the vice principal, saw me resting during nap time and asked if she could check my temperature. I had planned on coming to her anyways when I got a break for lunch, but I'm lucky she found me because my fever was 102. She's an amazing woman and immediately sent me home with instructions not to return until I felt 100% better. I went home and popped some pills and fell asleep on the couch. My husband was still at work, so I was home by myself. I get woken up probably an hour later by loud, and I mean fist-pounding loud, banging on my front door. My dog is going nuts, and I go grab our gun because I'm thinking it's someone trying to break in. I peek out the peephole, and my general manager, kind of like the principal, is beating on my front door and screaming my name. I'm not answering the door. I'm honestly scared. She is screaming that I need to come back to work. I didn't tell her I left, so without a positive COVID test, I had to come back. Screw that. I go back to my room, hoping she'll just go away. My car is parked in the garage, so there isn't really any way she can see if I'm actually home or not. After a couple of minutes, I get a phone call from my mom, who lives 4 hours away, sobbing that my GM called her and said I was missing. Missing. My boss knew I was home, and if honest to God was worried I was missing, would have called my husband, who is my first contact that actually lives in the same effing state. I'm livid at this point, because I had to explain to my mom what happened as my boss starts banging on my door. I walk to the front door and yank it open, with my mom still on the phone, when I see police officers outside. This woman called the police for a welfare check. Some of you might be wondering, well, if she went as far as to tell the cops that you were missing, maybe she thought you were. No, I know this because after explaining to the officers I was fine and just sick, she smugly walks up to me and says, and I freaking quote, "I knew you were there. You need to come back immediately. We have no one to cover you. I'll wait out here to follow you." I told her to shove off, and if she ever came back to my house, I would call the police for a restraining order. I never went back and put in a report to the corporate branch. From what my friends told me, they canned her after an investigation. I'm still in shock from it all. Apparently, she harassed other teachers as well. All this mess because I went home sick to protect my students. This original poster points out an issue that a lot of people have dealt with the past couple of years. It seems incredibly hard today for workers to get time off for pretty much any illness other than COVID. The pandemic didn't destroy every other sickness under the sun. People still get colds and fevers, and sometimes these things can be even worse than corona. The assistant GM at OP's daycare seems to have understood that, and was totally right to send OP home. Too bad their main boss couldn't see things the same way. Honestly, I'm not positive it's even legal to call the cops for something this bizarre. The moment they saw her boss smugly saying that she knew OP was fine, that should have told them they were on a false call. They don't take too kindly to that. Wasting public resources is a much greater crime than going home with a fever. My husband's been stealing rent money from my disabled sister. My 23-year-old sister is disabled. She can't work because of her immobility, but she receives SSDI benefits due to her disability. She used to live with our mom, who passed away 8 months ago. It's been hard for us. I took my sister in to live with me and my husband. Note that my husband doesn't take any part in her care whatsoever. Moreover, he started complaining about my sister from time to time. She cannot get her own place, and I would never, I repeat, never ever put her in a care home. I work and take care of her, and it's been going well for us. My husband is the one who usually handles her financials, because he's an accountant. I recently noticed that her benefit money wasn't enough to buy her essential stuff, like medical equipment. I didn't think much of it until I decided to do the math and found hundreds missing without an explanation. I talked to my sister, and she kept implying that my husband had something to do with it. She finally admitted that he'd been collecting rent money from her and told her to keep it a secret from me. I was floored, utterly in shock. I called him and had him come home for a confrontation. He first denied it, then said that it was logical because my sister is an adult living under our roof, and so she's expected to pay rent. I screamed my head off at him, telling him how effed up that was because she's disabled. This money's supposed to go to her care, and more importantly, he shouldn't have ever touched her money. I demanded he pay back all the money he took from her over the past months. He threw a fit, saying it's his house, and he gets to say who stays for free and who has to pay. I told him he had to pay it all back, or police would have to get involved. He looked shocked at the mention of police and rushed out. He tried to talk me out of making him pay, but I gave him a set time and told him I'm serious. Am I the jerk for demanding my husband pay back the money he'd been secretly taking as rent from my disabled sister? The first bit of weirdness in the story is that OP didn't think much of it when the money first went missing. If enough was gone that her sister couldn't afford medical equipment, wouldn't she have quite a few thoughts about that? If lack of healthcare was something OP could just shrug her shoulders at and move on with her day, what in the world was the tipping point that finally made her do the math on the missing finances? The comments are really divided on whether OP is the jerk here. On one hand, it seems wrong that the husband kept this from his wife. However, it almost feels like reverse ableism to imply that disabled people can't or shouldn't pay the same living expenses as everybody else. And since OP's sister isn't mentally disabled, many feel it's wrong for OP to imply that this money was stolen. In fact, OP's threat to involve the police feels like yet another waste of public resources. If her husband is honestly worried that the police are going to hunt him down for collecting rent from a willing tenant, then he might not be smart enough to be making financial decisions for anybody. But I'm not the accountant here, so maybe I'm wrong. What do you think? Do you side with the commenters who support the husband, or do you think this qualifies as theft? Let us know your thoughts down below. If you made it this far in the video, consider liking and subscribing for more videos coming. My landlords think it's my fault their idiot kid climbed into a hot dryer. So I'm living in a basement suite that has a laundry room next to it. The room is shared by me and the family I'm renting from as part of the rental agreement. One day a week, the family will unlock the door in the laundry room that leads to my suite, and I thus have access to the room for the day. I put my clothes in the machine and shut the door to the suite so that I don't hear all that ruckus. There are stairs in the laundry room that lead up to the rest of the house, so I assume that's how they access the laundry room. I had my clothes drying in the laundry room. All of a sudden, I hear yelling from the wife. The next thing I know, an ambulance has arrived. I soon learned that, apparently, their 4-year-old opened up the dryer and climbed in. Their dryer was faulty. It doesn't shut off when you open the door. So the kid was tumbling in there while the door was open, and all because the machine didn't shut itself off when the door was opened. This was last week, and the kid turned out to be relatively fine. But now the landlord and landlady want me to reimburse their son's ambulance bill and medical bill, totaling $8,477.34, because it was my laundry that the kid climbed into. They have no insurance. I didn't think I was responsible. First, because I'm not in charge of watching their kids. I'm paying an insane amount of rent to begin with. I didn't agree to babysit anyone in addition to that. Second, it's their laundry machine that's apparently faulty. But they insist, and I'm not sure. I went to a forum that was oriented towards landlords to see if I was really responsible. I was asked if the family ever raised rent. I have been living there for 1 year and 4 months, so no. I admit they did not raise rent when the lease was renewed after the first year, but still, they didn't do it for charity. I pay my rent on time every time, and don't cause any problems. I assume them not collecting a little extra is still better than the risk of trying to find a tenant that isn't trouble, or at least that was their thinking. Anyways, I'm not planning to stay after the lease ends. I was then told by the landlords on the forum that I should be grateful that they did not raise rent, and should pay up to be morally fair. Am I the jerk for not wanting to reimburse medical bills for a kid who jumped into the dryer while my clothes were drying? There's an update to this story, but it doesn't actually provide much of interest. If you're just itching to know the details of OP's rental agreement, feel free to find his link in the description. Otherwise, this story really needs to be a little more Marvel and a little less DC. Nobody needs a 4-hour director's cut telling us why OP only does his laundry 1 day a week. I just want to see more scenes of this kid who's so dedicated to his own self-destruction that he's able to ignore the burning hot metal of the dryer drum as he climbs in for a tumble. It seems a little odd that a number of people would tell OP to pay the kids' bills just because the landlords haven't raised rent. Granted, it also seems odd that OP would ask advice from a forum that he already knows supports landlords. Anyone in their right mind knows that a random person drying their clothes isn't responsible for a toddler taking a kamikaze dive into a laundry machine. It's unlikely these people will actually give OP much trouble. If there's half a brain between the two of them, they'd rather have him paying rent until his lease runs out than risk chasing him away with a legal claim they can't back up. My husband missed our daughter's birth because he'd rather talk to his friends. I was in labor for 26 hours and was in a lot of pain as I did not take an epidural. My husband was constantly on the phone, either playing games or talking with his bros, being really loud. When I asked him to please hang up, he'd hang up the phone, but then like 10 minutes later, he'd call them back. He really wanted to talk to them because his friends went on a boys' trip without him, since I asked him to stay back so he could be here when I went into labor. They were calling to tell him about how their trip was going. He apologized to them and blamed it on me being a nag. I was really annoyed and told him that if he wanted to talk to his friends, he could do that elsewhere so I can be in pain in peace. And he was like, "All right, fine, baby. I'll just call them back later." So I had about 20 minutes of peace until his mom FaceTimed him. He then proceeded to put me in the video call. His mom makes a comment about how she remembers when she was in labor with him and that she still did herself up. She even claimed she looked so good that the doctor was flirting with her. I was holding back everything inside me to not say something, as I didn't want to disrespect my mother-in-law. But at the same time, she sometimes just makes the stupidest comments at the worst times. And at this moment, I could not stand talking to her. A nurse ended up coming in and could tell I was upset. She asked me if everything was all right, and I told her I just really wanted to be alone. She wound up kicking out my husband. In turn, he ended up missing the birth of our firstborn daughter because he left the hospital angry that I got the nurse to kick him out of the room. He refused to come see his daughter afterwards because he was angry at me for kicking him out. My mother-in-law, who did visit me at the hospital, wouldn't stop talking about how I'm such a bad wife for removing my husband from the room. When I got home, he kept on bringing up how I ruined a moment of bonding with his daughter and how he could never forgive me for that. Am I the jerk for kicking my husband out of the delivery room because he was making phone calls? No, you're not the jerk. He's mad that he missed the birth of his daughter, but it sounds like he wasn't fully present to begin with. And while it's definitely not his fault that his mother said something out of line, he should know what the dynamic between his mom and OP is like by now. So he couldn't have thought that she'd really want to have that talk while she was in the delivery room. This husband is a jerk at worst and oblivious at best. Also, why is he on the phone with his friends anyway? If they're on a trip, shouldn't they be enjoying their trip? I have never once gone on a trip with my friends and spent the whole day on the phone with the one guy who couldn't make it. It's good to have close friends and all, but that's a bit too much. I'm done rewarding weaponized incompetence with pancakes. I woke up at 5:30 a.m., got myself ready for work, and got the kids' backpacks ready with their lunches, water bottles, and midday snack. I then started making pancakes, our Friday morning tradition, and getting my two kids up and ready for the day. All the while, my husband woke up at 6:15 a.m. He works from home, so he didn't get ready. He rolled out of bed, used the bathroom, and then proceeds to sit on the couch playing a game on his phone. I'm sitting there brushing my daughter's hair and flipping pancakes, and he says, "Is there anything I can help with?" I was upset because I'm not his mom. I don't need to tell him what to do. I say as much, and he gets upset and says, "I don't know what the morning routine is. What can I help with?" Like, no, you can't see our daughter needs socks or that our son needs his hair brushed. Heck, you make the pancakes. Take out the trash. The kitchen is a mess. Do the dishes, pick up the living room where you left your dirty underwear, get hoodies and shoes ready for the kids, feed the effing dog. So many things to do. But no, since I didn't tell him exactly what to do, he did nothing, and I'll have to do all of those things sooner or later. So I didn't make him any pancakes, just enough for the kids. And there was one extra, which I had. Am I the jerk? I read a post a while ago about someone saying their spouse was a narcissist because they didn't make them food when they made it for the whole family. Everyone agreed. Now I feel bad. A bit of important context for this story is that OP and her husband have been married for 12 years. According to her comments, they've had talks about this before. As it turns out, women hate their husbands asking if there's anything they can do to help, because they feel like it's stressful to have to know the answer to that question. Needless to say, the comments are pretty divided on this, not just by men and women either. Some women don't find it stressful at all when a man asks if they need help, and think the other women are being overly dramatic. And some men really want any female commenters out there to know that they're way more helpful than OP's husband. There are also some commenters who wonder if OP might have specific ways of doing things, if she's picky about brushing her son's hair or what their kids wear to school. Then trying to step in and help without asking first might result in her redoing his tasks anyway. There's no evidence that's happening in this story, but it does happen in some marriages. In any case, it's weird that OP's husband doesn't know the morning routine. Why do the couples in these stories always feel like they're just now meeting for the first time? In any case, I'm not dumb enough to make a judgment on this one. Men and women in the comments are just going to have to flip a coin to decide which half of our viewers get to be mad at me today. But I'd love to hear your own thoughts on this story. Is OP's husband a jerk, or did she overreact to a simple question? Let us know your thoughts down below. Please leave your stories in the comments. I'd love to make a video of them in the future. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.